baby. I'm going to break that glass.
No, you ain't.
Yes, I ain't.
No, you ain't. Now, you drop that rock and you get over.
To the world, Andy Griffith was the picture of warmth and charm, the small-town sheriff who whistled his way into America's living rooms every week. Fans adored him as the easygoing face of Mayberry, a man who seemed too kind, too gentle, and too downright wholesome to ever hold a grudge. But behind that slow southern drawl and easy smile was a man who didn't suffer fools lightly, especially when someone crossed him the wrong way. And there was one person who did just that, not in a harmless spat, not in some minor misunderstanding, but in a way that cut deep. Griffith didn't just dislike him. He didn't roll his eyes and move on. He carried that bitterness like a stone in his pocket, heavy and unshakable. Andy Griffith utterly despised him. So, who was bold or unlucky enough to ignite the quiet fury of Mayberry's most beloved sheriff? And why did Griffith, a man known for patience and restraint, refuse to let it go? This is the side of Andy Griffith you never saw on screen. From Carolina roots to Mayberry dreams. Andy Griffith's story didn't begin with Hollywood lights or red carpets and fancy cars. It started in the humblest way possible, June 1st, 1926, in the small town of Mount Airy, North Carolina. He was the only child of Carl Lee and Geneva Griffith, and from the very beginning, life made it clear it wasn't going to hand him anything easy. As a baby, before his parents could even afford a proper home, Andy slept in dresser drawers at relatives' houses. No crib, no bed, just drawers. By the time his father managed to buy a house on the south side of Mount Airy, the blue-collar part of town, Andy was 3 years old and already aware that he came from what people whispered about as the wrong side of the tracks. That sense of being an outsider never really left him. He was shy, almost painfully so, the kind of kid who slipped into the background. But when he figured out that making people laugh could break the ice, everything changed. Humor became his way in, his secret weapon. Suddenly, the boy who kept his head down was standing a little taller, realizing he had a gift that could win over anyone. High school became the place where his love of the arts truly bloomed. Drama classes gave him a stage to play on, and swing music stirred something in him he couldn't ignore. Raised a Baptist, Andy found an unlikely mentor in Ed Mickey, a minister at Grace Moravian Church. Mickey didn't just preach. He led the church's brass band, and he saw a spark in Andy. He taught him to sing, to play the trombone, and more importantly, to believe in his own talent. Under Mickey's guidance, Andy's voice grew stronger, his confidence sharper, and by the time he graduated in 1944, he had already begun carving out the path that would define his life. That same year, opportunity knocked in the form of The Lost Colony, Paul Green's long-running outdoor play about Roanoke Island. For Andy, stepping into that world was electric. He started with small roles, but year after year, he worked his way up until he landed the role of Sir Walter Raleigh, the kind of part that makes you feel like you've truly arrived. It wasn't Broadway, but to a boy from Mount Airy, it might as well have been. College was the next step, and he chose the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. At first, he thought he might follow the pulpit, training to be a Moravian preacher, but his heart pulled him elsewhere, and he changed his major to music. It was a decision that would shift the course of his life. At UNC, he wasn't just another student. He became a force. He joined the Carolina Playmakers, threw himself into operettas, and even rose to become president of the school's chapter of Phi Mu Alpha Sinfonia, the country's oldest music fraternity. Roles in productions like The Gondoliers, The Mikado, and HMS Pinafore gave him polish, timing, and presence, tools that would serve him long after the curtain dropped. By 1949, Griffith had his Bachelor of Music degree in hand. But instead of chasing stardom right away, he poured himself into teaching. At Goldsboro High School, he became the music and drama teacher who pushed his students the way Mickey had once pushed him. Among those students was a young Carl Cassell, who would go on to become a legendary voice in radio. And even while he was shaping young lives, Andy was quietly shaping his own future too. He started to write, building the foundation for the storyteller who would one day own America's living rooms. Whistling his way into America's living rooms. Andy Griffith didn't burst onto the scene as an actor with a script in hand. His early career was built on something much simpler and much riskier. He stood alone as a monologist, spinning long, winding tales in the voice of Deacon Andy Griffith, an easygoing country parson who could make even the most ordinary events sound like sermons dipped in humor. One of his earliest pieces, What It Was Football, became the calling card that changed everything. In it, Griffith, playing the confused preacher, tried to make sense of a football game as if he were witnessing an alien ritual. Released in 1953, the recording was first picked up by Colonial Records before Capitol Records reissued it later that year. By 1954, the monologue had climbed to number 9 on the charts, turning Andy Griffith into an unlikely recording star. On the flip side of that single, his deacon gave Romeo and Juliet the same backwoods treatment, proving that Shakespeare could be just as funny in a southern drawl as in iambic pentameter. Television took notice. Variety shows welcomed him on stage, where audiences laughed until their sides hurt as Griffith delivered one monologue after another. But the real turning point came in 1955 with Ira Levin's No Time for Sergeants. What started as a one-hour teleplay for the United States Steel Hour became the role that would define Griffith's early career. Will Stockdale, a country boy tossed into the rigid world of the U.S. Air Force. The part was tailor-made for him, and Broadway soon came calling with a full-length version later that same year. Griffith not only held his own, he stole the show. The role earned him a Tony nomination, and while he didn't take home the trophy, he did win the Theatre World Award, a nod that marked him as a Broadway star in the making. Critics couldn't get enough. Brooks Atkinson of the New York Times wrote that all Griffith had to do was walk on stage and look his audience in the eye. Hollywood wasn't far behind. Warner Brothers adapted No Time for Sergeants into a feature film in 1958, once again casting Griffith as Stockdale. The film also introduced audiences to a jittery little corporal played by Don Knotts. It was the beginning of one of television's most legendary partnerships, a bond that would carry both men through the Andy Griffith Show and beyond. And if No Time for Sergeants sounds familiar, that's because it later inspired the TV spin-off Gomer Pyle, USMC, proving just how much mileage Griffith's simple country boy character had. Griffith wasn't finished with the stage, though. In 1959, he stepped into the title role of the musical Destry Rides Again, opposite Dolores Gray. The show ran for more than 470 performances, and Griffith earned another Tony nomination, this time for Distinguished Musical Actor. He lost to Jackie Gleason, but by then it was clear. Griffith had range, and Broadway loved him. Hollywood, however, wasn't always as kind. That same year, Warner Brothers tried him in another military comedy, Onion Head, this time as a Coast Guard sailor. The film flopped, both critically and commercially, but Griffith kept moving forward. Then came the role that proved he wasn't just a funny man with a southern twang. In 1957, Griffith made his film debut in Elia Kazan's A Face in the Crowd. Gone was the wide-eyed country innocent. Instead, Griffith played a drifter who manipulates his way into television stardom and uses his fame as a weapon for political power. It was a dark, electric performance that stunned critics and audiences alike. Starring alongside Patricia Neal and a young Lee Remick, Griffith showed a side of himself no one expected: intense, commanding, even dangerous. Decades later, Griffith reflected on the film and admitted it had grown more popular with time than it ever was upon release. For him, it was proof that his talent stretched far beyond the aw-shucks persona he carried so naturally. Television, though, was where destiny truly waited. His first TV appearance had been in that No Time for Sergeants teleplay in 1955. But 5 years later, he found himself in the role that would change his life forever. In 1960, Griffith appeared in an episode of Make Room for Daddy, starring Danny Thomas, playing a small-town sheriff who also happened to be justice of the peace and local newspaper editor. The setup was simple. Thomas's character runs a stop sign and suddenly finds himself in the middle of Mayberry justice. What no one knew at the time was that this episode wasn't just a guest spot, it was a backdoor pilot. From that single performance, the Andy Griffith Show was born, with producer Sheldon Leonard at the helm. And just like that, the boy from Mount Airy was about to bring Mayberry to the world. But the magic of Mayberry wasn't carried by Griffith alone. The heart of the show, the very thing that made it unforgettable, came from the bond between Sheriff Andy Taylor and his high-strung deputy, Barney Fife. That partnership didn't just light up screens, it reshaped television comedy and created one of the most iconic duos in TV history. The Sheriff and His Deputy, a bond beyond Mayberry. To classic TV fans, the Andy Griffith Show was the picture of wholesome small-town comedy. Mayberry felt like the kind of place where everyone knew your name, where problems were simple and laughter was guaranteed. But off-screen, the friendship between Andy Griffith and Don Knotts wasn't as clean-cut as the image they projected. On camera, they were inseparable, the steady sheriff and his jittery deputy, two country cousins who seemed to fit together like parts of the same soul. Behind the curtain, though, their bond was complicated, messy, and loaded with secrets that didn't quite match the nostalgia their show inspired. Both men carried baggage from the start. They grew up in poverty during the Depression, Andy in a modest house on the rough side of Mount Airy, North Carolina, and Don in a threadbare West Virginia boarding house. That kind of upbringing forged a certain toughness in them. It also meant they recognized something in each other when their paths first crossed on Broadway in No Time for Sergeants, back in 1955. They clicked instantly, a natural fit. But their friendship was never simple. Behind the smiles, both men battled flaws that shadowed their careers. Infidelity was one of them. Andy's reputation as the kind-hearted sheriff of Mayberry didn't follow him home. By the time actress Annetta Corso joined the cast in 1963 as schoolteacher Helen Crump, Andy's on-screen romance with her had already spilt into real life. He kept the affair hidden from his wife, Barbara, though the cracks in his marriage deepened as both of them leaned on alcohol to numb the tension. Andy's charm drew in other women too, including Joanna Moore, a guest actress who later married Ryan O'Neal. Though Andy remarried twice after his divorce from Barbara, his most enduring off-screen relationships seemed to be with Anita and with Don. Don's private life carried its own complexities. He had a reputation for being a ladies' man, enjoying the attention of women who found his nervous energy endearing. He married 3 times, first to Catherine Metz, with whom he had 2 children, then to Lauralee Suchna, and finally to Francis Yarborough, who stayed with him until his death. But in between, there were countless dates and affairs, part of a pattern that mirrored Andy's own restless search for something more. If the affairs revealed one layer of their private lives, the anger revealed another. Andy, whose public persona was rooted in calm wisdom, was capable of rages so fierce they terrified those around him. He smashed hotel rooms, punched out windscreens, and lashed out in ways that caught people off guard. George Lindsay, who played Goober Pyle, once described how the cast often lived in fear of those eruptions. The calm sheriff mask slipped often enough to leave scars, and when Don eventually walked away from the show after a bitter money dispute, those rages only worsened. Andy earned over $1 million a year as part owner of the series, while Don felt undervalued, paid what he called chump change. When he asked for a true partnership, Andy refused, and Don left Mayberry for a movie career. The absence of his closest friend left Andy's temper unchecked, and those who remained felt the full weight of it. Andy himself later admitted to years of therapy, confessing that feelings of inadequacy haunted him from childhood into adulthood. Jealousy seeped into their friendship too. Andy never won an Emmy for The Andy Griffith Show, while Don collected multiple awards for his role as Barney Fife. The recognition stung, and Andy struggled with the quiet bitterness of always playing the straight man to Don's comic genius. Don, for his part, wrestled with jealousy of his own. He sometimes bristled at how easily Andy could charm a room with a joke, even when Don considered himself the true comedian. Their rivalry was as real as their camaraderie, a constant push and pull that kept their friendship sharp-edged. Don's struggles didn't end there. He fought personal demons that ran deep, including a dependence on sleeping pills that threatened to overwhelm him. By 1960, his addiction had reached a breaking point, driven by fears and anxieties that traced back to his childhood. He worked tirelessly with a psychiatrist to break free, confronting those demons head-on. According to his son, the therapy may well have saved his life. And yet, despite the flaws, despite the jealousy, the infidelity, and the rage, Andy and Don remained bound together. On the set of The Andy Griffith Show, they created moments of genuine joy that couldn't be faked. Ron Howard later remembered that Andy was Don's greatest audience, often reduced to tears of laughter by his friends' antics. Whatever storms brewed behind the scenes, when the cameras rolled, the bond between Andy and Don was undeniable. Messy, complicated, but real. But as tight as his friendship with Don was, it wasn't the only relationship that defined him. Away from the spotlight of Mayberry, Andy's private life told a very different story. One of passion, heartbreak, and marriages that molded him as much as his career ever did. Griffith's love life. Andy Griffith will forever be etched in pop culture as the calm sheriff of Mayberry. But when the cameras stopped rolling, his love life was anything but steady. 3 marriages, 3 very different women, and a trail of twists that kept his personal story almost as dramatic as anything he played on screen. It all started long before Mayberry. Back in the early 1940s, Andy was a young music student at the University of North Carolina when he met Barbara Bray Edwards, a soprano with her eyes on the opera stage. He was chasing both music and acting. She was chasing the spotlight, and together they became a duet in life and on stage. They married in 1949 and took their act on the road with a mix of music, dancing, and comedy. And for a while it seemed like they had it all. But life at home was far more complicated. Andy and Barbara adopted 2 children, Sam and Dixie, but the marriage cracked under the weight of its own struggles. After nearly 23 years, they called it quits. In 1972, Sam would later wrestle with alcoholism, a battle that ended tragically when he died in 1996 at just 38. Dixie chose a quieter path, stepping out of the public eye. But she carried forward Andy's legacy in her own way, raising 3 daughters who gave him the title of grandfather. Andy didn't stay single long. By 1973, he was walking down the aisle again, this time with Solika Kasuto, a Greek actress and singer. Unlike Barbara, Solika preferred to keep her life away from the stage lights and headlines. Their marriage lasted 8 years, quiet and mostly private, before dissolving in 1981. The details remain blurry. 2 people who simply couldn't make it work, slipping out of each other's lives as quietly as they had come together. Then came the unexpected twist. In 1983, While filming the TV movie Murder in Coweta County, Andy crossed paths with a young actress named Cindy Knight. What started as a simple on-set connection quickly grew into something much deeper. Just months later, on April 12, 1983, they were married. Unlike his first two wives, Cindy stepped back from her career and built her life around their marriage. She stood by Andy through his battles with health, anchored his later years, and remained his partner until the very end in 2012. 3 women, 3 marriages. Each one revealed a different side of the man who played Mayberry's most trusted sheriff. Steady on screen, restless off it. Andy Griffith's love life was as layered and complex as the man himself. And if his marriages showed how turbulent his private world could be, the set of The Andy Griffith Show revealed its own share of fractures. Not every bond in Mayberry mirrored the warmth of the scripts. One relationship in particular carried a shadow that never quite lifted. When Mayberry soured, Andy and Aunt Bee's silent rift. For 10 years, Frances Bavier wore the apron of Aunt Bee, the sweet, bustling homemaker of Mayberry. But away from the cameras, she admitted the role came with a heavy price. She revealed that it was difficult to play a character for so long and be so identified with it that she no longer seemed to exist as herself. All the recognition went to Aunt Bee, not Frances, and the woman behind the character felt invisible. That invisibility turned bitter when it came to Andy Griffith. Frances resented watching him scoop up the best comedic bits while she sat in the background. She confessed that she often felt forced to take a back seat, to stand aside while the laughs went elsewhere. The imbalance dug deep enough that she sought therapy, trying to wrestle with her frustration over being sidelined. The differences between her and Andy only sharpened when the cameras stopped rolling. He thrived on mischief, pulling practical jokes and filling the downtime with music and laughter. She wanted none of it. Frances preferred a professional, serious atmosphere. To her, his antics weren't charming. They were a reminder of how far apart they stood. The tension lingered long after Mayberry faded into reruns. In the mid-1980s, Andy tried to bridge the gap, visiting her at her home in Siler City with Ron Howard. Frances wouldn't even let them through the door. By then, she had already turned down reunion offers, refusing to revisit a place that brought her so much unease. Only near the end of her life did she allow the guard to fall. Dying of cancer, Frances picked up the phone and told Andy she was sorry they hadn't gotten along better. She admitted it had been her fault, that she wished things had been different, that she regretted the years wasted in cold silence. Andy's response was measured. From his view, they had gotten along just fine. It was just that Frances didn't feel that way most of the time. 2 people bound forever by Mayberry, yet divided by a bitterness that outlived the show itself. But if Aunt Bee's coldness left Andy quietly wounded, nothing compared to the firestorm of emotions stirred by his closest on-screen partner. For all the laughter they created together, Andy carried a shadowed truth about Don Knotts, one that simmered beneath the surface and shocked those who later learned it. Andy Griffith utterly despised him. When you watch reruns of The Andy Griffith Show, especially those first 5 seasons, you can't help but get swept up in the magic of Andy Taylor and Barney Fife. Sheriff and deputy, straight man and fool, fatherly calm and jittery chaos. It was a pairing so natural, you'd swear it wasn't scripted at all. And let's be honest, bring up the show today, and most people skip straight past Andy to gush about Barney Fife. They'll tell you, "I love Don Knotts. Barney was just the best." And they're right. Don Knotts was one of the greats, a comedian whose nervous, twitchy energy seemed to bubble right out of his bones. Long before Mayberry, he had created his nervous man character. a wiry ball of nerves that audiences adored. Barney Fife was that character perfected, a man who strutted around in a deputy's badge but had the fragile ego of a child. He carried himself like a soldier but fumbled like a schoolboy, desperate to prove he belonged in uniform. That mix, false bravado wrapped around pure vulnerability, was comedy gold. People didn't just laugh at Barney, they connected with him. And Andy Griffith knew it. Andy admitted many times that Barney was the funny one, the heartbeat of the show's comedy, while his role as Sheriff Taylor was to be the steady anchor. Andy was the straight man, the audience's surrogate, the one holding the scene steady so Barney could fly off the rails. Their on-screen friendship became the soul of the Andy Griffith Show. It was warm, believable, and filled with affection, and viewers couldn't get enough of watching these two opposites spark off each other. But then, just 5 seasons in, Don Knotts left. And everything changed. The departure created a hole that no one could fill. The chemistry that made the show sing was suddenly gone. Fans still tuned in. The ratings even stayed high, but the magic had vanished. Even decades later, people talk about it the same way. Once Barney was gone and the show shifted to color, it just wasn't the same. In Color became shorthand for "the good part is over." The program carried on professionally, sure, but the spark that made it unforgettable had walked out the door with Don. So why did he leave? It all went back to a simple assumption. Andy and Don both believed the show would only last 5 seasons. Don built his career plans around that idea. While filming was still underway, he signed a deal with Universal Pictures, ready to step into a movie career. In the 1960s, that was the big leap. Television was still considered the low rung of the ladder, while movies were the dream. For Don, moving to film wasn't just a career choice, it was validation. His mother, Elsie, had always dreamed of seeing her son on the big screen, and now it was finally happening. But then, something unexpected happened. CBS wasn't ready to give up on the Andy Griffith Show. It was a ratings juggernaut, and the network wanted more. Andy was offered a massive deal to keep going, something like $1 million a year, an unheard-of salary at the time. Naturally, Andy agreed. And then he went to Don, asking if there was any way he'd consider staying. That conversation could have changed television history. Don, loyal as ever, hinted that he might be willing to give up his Universal deal if Andy gave him an ownership stake in the show. It wasn't a demand to be equals, not a grab for power, just a modest percentage, maybe 5%. Something to show that he was more than a sidekick, that he was part of what made the series shine. Andy hesitated. Maybe he misunderstood, thinking Don was asking for too much. Maybe he was caught between loyalty to his friend and pressure from the studio. Whatever the reason, Andy's response was lukewarm, something along the lines of, "Well, we'll see." And with that, the moment slipped away. Don honored his movie contract. Mayberry lost its heartbeat. At the time, Don had no regrets. He loved being a film star. He made 5 movies with Universal in the 1960s, and every one of them turned a profit. Titles like The Incredible Mr. Limpet and The Ghost and Mr. Chicken weren't just successful. They cemented his place in Hollywood comedy. He was in theaters, his name on the marquee, and for a boy from West Virginia, that was the dream come true. But as the years passed, perspective shifted. Both Andy and Don came to realize that Mayberry had been lightning in a bottle. Yes, Don's films were fun. Yes, Andy found success with later projects like Matlock. But nothing ever matched those 5 years when Andy Taylor and Barney Fife shared the screen. That was their masterpiece, their legacy. And both men knew it. The beauty of their relationship, though, was that the friendship survived what the show could not. Don may have left Mayberry, but he never left Andy. They stayed close, supporting each other through marriages, career highs, and personal struggles. When Matlock came along in the 1980s, Andy made sure Don had a recurring role. It wasn't nostalgia, it was loyalty. Andy never forgot the man who made Mayberry laugh, and Don never stopped cherishing the friend who gave him the stage. Even near the end of their lives, their bond held steady. Both men looked back and acknowledged that the Andy Griffith Show was the pinnacle of their work. Don didn't regret his films, and Andy didn't regret carrying on the series. But together, they recognized that what they built in those first 5 seasons was something rare, something that couldn't be recreated, no matter how many color episodes came after. In the end, the story of Andy and Don is more than the story of a sitcom. It's about 2 men whose talents meshed so perfectly that they created magic, then lost it, then found a way to keep the friendship alive anyway. The show gave them fame and gave the world laughter. But underneath it all, it gave them each other. And maybe that's why reruns of The Andy Griffith Show still feel timeless. Because behind the laughter, behind the small-town charm, you can feel it. 2 friends who loved and trusted each other, even when careers pulled them in different directions. Sheriff Andy Taylor and Barney Fife might have been roles on a script, but the bond between Andy Griffith and Don Knotts, that was real. What do you think about the bond between Don Knotts and Andy Griffith? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stick around and click the next video on your screen. We know you'll love it.